Welcome to the Chirosation, where chiropractors share their stories and lessons learnt in practice. The intention of the Chirosation is to provide resources and a community that will help chiropractors realize their innate potential. So join the Chirosation today. This is a really unique conversation. James Kuegler is a full-time running coach and a chiropractic graduate. I've really been looking forward to this conversation because, in my opinion, James is practicing chiropractic without being in an office and adjusting. He has taken all his knowledge and experience and is applying it to a different field, taking chiropractic to the top runners in New Zealand and abroad. James is full of passion and knowledge, and I learnt so much from this conversation. I know you will too. Welcome to the Chirosation, and this is where the conversation starts. Welcome to the Chirosation. With me I have James Kuegler, a running coach and chiropractor, coming in to share his stories and lessons learned, and I'm really excited about this one. So James, welcome.
Thank you, it's great to be here.
Very good. So just to start us off and get warmed up, what got you into chiropractic in the first place?
Actually, ironically enough, Ben, it was chiropractor Kent Blackburn, who you work with, who was probably the start of me getting into chiropractic. So as a 13-year-old, very keen on sport, in particular rugby at the time, I ended up at Dr. Blackburn's office getting checked and adjusted. So it was from there, going through school, wanting to do something mixing kind of sport and health, but not really having much of much success necessarily with the physiotherapists that I had worked with, as well as the traditional medical professionals that I had worked with. So it was kind of very much so Kent Blackburn is responsible for me ending up at Chiropractic College.
I'm sure he'll add that one to the notch and be quite proud of it.
Absolutely.
That's awesome. So when did you start?
At Chiropractic College?
Yeah.
I started in the New Zealand College of Chiropractic in 2008.
Because did you head straight out of high school straight into it, or?
I spent a year. I knew that I was going to study chiropractic, but I also knew that I was going to go into a gap year in the UK. So I went and drank myself stupid and did crazy things around Europe that young Kiwis often do.
Yeah.
When I look back at that, I'm not necessarily so fond of those memories, but it was great to kind of have that break between high school and
it's
university.
kind of like, for a lot of Kiwis at least, it kind of seems like a bit of an initiation process, right? You kind of finish high school and you want to just kind of have a blast before you actually settle down.
Absolutely, and it did. I mean, it certainly gave me the appreciation of health, or unhealthy for that matter. I mean, I certainly, by the time I got back from the UK, I was probably the least healthy that I've ever been in my life in terms of weight and vitality and everything else. So it's been a really cool journey over the last 6, 7, 8 years to get to, more than that, 10 years to get to where we are now.
Yeah, that's amazing. So obviously you went through college, you had the ups and downs and the journeys of studying at the Chiro College. And then afterwards, how did you transition into what you're doing now, which is a running coach?
Yeah, totally. So I'm working full time as a running coach. The journey to that kind of happened while going through chiropractic college, being that I needed to, as you say, I had my ups and downs, and any lecturers listening to this will certainly understand, and those who study with me will understand as well. So I needed a way of paying my way through chiropractic college. So I was working a lot at the time with a company called Vibrant Five Fingers, who were, I guess, off the back of the success of the Born to Run book, were kind of big. So they, through some contacts there, they asked me to start doing some stuff with them around being an athlete, as well as kind of being a spokesperson. So from there, that mixed with my chiropractic studies, mixed with the fact that I was running at a very high level, meant that I kind of somehow ended up coaching a couple of athletes, and that from there I grew into a full-time coaching business. So once I graduated, I haven't practiced full-time. I've always, subsequent to finishing at Chiropractic College, I've been working full-time as a coach.
Fantastic. And that started out as Cadence, is that right? And then it transitioned into what it is now? What was that journey?
Even go further back, it started off as Cougs Coaching, which was all about James Kuegler, funnily enough. And then at some point I kind of wanted to take me out of the mix. And so I started Cadence Coaching. And so Cadence was myself, and for a period of time, Ainsley Rowan, who's also a chiropractor, was in Christchurch, now in Auckland, was doing some work for me. And Cadence was massively successful. And then in February 2015, I sat down with a mentor of mine and kind of worked out what were the good things and what were the bad things about the way that the business was operating. And from there, it was quite clear that there needed to be a shift. So kind of transitioned out of, transitioned to doing less program writing and more coaching in terms of hands-on coaching and working with people at an in-depth level, so that I can use my skills and knowledge from a chiropractic perspective to be able to help a person and an athlete, rather than just saying, well, here's the schedule of what I want you to do from a running perspective. So we went from Kueg's coaching in 2010 to Caden's coaching in 2012, and then in 2015 moved to what is now James Kuegler coaching.
Perfect. And it's kind of been just a metamorphosis process, figuring out what works, what doesn't work, and kind of growing from there, yeah?
Absolutely. I'll probably never be satisfied with the status quo, and so evolution is the natural approach. So,
mate, that sounds like a chiropractor to me.
Absolutely, yeah.
That's brilliant.
Yeah.
Because that's what I really love about this. It's you can practice as a chiropractor without being in an office. And I mean, my experience with you was seeing you at the chiro clinic, because you're a couple of years ahead of me before you graduated. So I obviously recognised you from there. But then the next interaction was talking with Kent, because he obviously trains and you're his coach from time to time as well. So that was the next interaction. I thought, oh wow, that's really interesting. Here's this guy who was obviously a chiropractor, practicing that way, but has decided to take all that knowledge and experience and apply it to a completely different field and really take it to people in a vitalistic way. And you can talk so effectively about it, because we had you at the clinic not too long ago and actually come in and share what you're talking about, and I was really hoping that today I can get some of that on recording as well, and for you to kind of share some of your knowledge and share some of your experience about it. And sure. If you can jump in and talk about
sure
that, would be great.
Tap into some of that, but you did right that it's I'm probably reasonably unique in a chiropractic setting where I'm a qualified chiropractor. I don't currently hold an annual practicing certificate, so I'm not checking and adjusting patients, but I'm still talking about chiropractic and the movement of the human body, on a day-to-day basis. I am, I guess, fortunate that my fiance, Dr. Anna Murphy, is also a chiropractor, so it's easy enough particularly from a local setting, for people to be referred to her as well. I'm working with athletes all around the country, if not the world. I have some clients as far abroad as Ecuador, so it's pretty hard for me to check and adjust those guys. So it's it kind of works as it stands at the moment, at least, to be able to talk about the way that the human body moves and should move. And then in essence direct people to chiropractors around the country, around the world, which is brilliant.
And that's what you kind of need. You need someone who understands how the different fields operate and can actually kind of transition between it from a healthcare perspective, from a doctor's perspective, and then into a coaching perspective, and how you can actually communicate with athletes and say, this is what's going on with you, go get checked by a chiropractor. Because how many running coaches out there are doing that?
And that's pretty much why James Kuegler coaching, as it currently stands, started, because there's, if we think about it from a hierarchical perspective, from a coaching, as a running coach, there's 1,000,001 free training programs that anyone could jump online and find and download, that really offer no specificity. You've then got varying degrees of specificity of people who call themselves coaches, whatever that means. For some of them, that means that all of a sudden they just put a label under themselves and call themselves a coach, and then some others who genuinely have some knowledge and some understanding and some skills to actually call themselves a coach. Whereas I'd like to think that I kind of put myself in a slightly different place to be able to talk about human movement and everything else.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's talk about that a little bit, because
Totally.
I love your perspective. I mean, you're so knowledgeable about this, and I find it fascinating as well from a health practitioner point of view myself, and the recommendations, and then obviously being able to forward my patients if they want more information to that. Here's James's card, go see him, he's the expert in it, and go have fun.
Absolutely.
So when you're talking with someone, say, who's just starting out running, not really sure what they want to do, sick of kind of this sedentary lifestyle and wanting to get to actually move in a more kind of natural fashion, what are the kind of recommendations that you'd make? What's some basic tips and tricks that you talk about?
This is where I'll probably start off slowly, and as I gain momentum, I'll start speaking really, really quickly.
Perfect.
And certainly interrupt me if there's something we want to go down a rabbit hole, because really it just becomes for me, talking running technique for people or movement principles becomes second nature. But sometimes it's kind of challenging to tap into that into that. So really, I guess I speak to it from a chiropractic perspective. Obviously, as chiropractors or students of chiropractic, whoever's listening to this, you have a really good understanding of what the pelvis does and what the spine does. Often, particularly going through the New Zealand College of Chiropractic, you come down a very straight route or philosophical construct. That being, there's often a blissful ignorance or of what's happening above and below or outside of the spine and the pelvis, and so you really, with respect to running, I look back to that stuff to say, okay, well, if we can control what the pelvis does and if we can control what the spine does, then running's going to be a whole lot easier. And it's one of those weird things where if we look at athletes in most sports, most pursuits, then the understanding of having some sort of formal coaching is pretty well understood. But running is one of the few sports that I have come across where, for the vast majority of people, they don't ever have or don't ever see the need to have any, I guess, formal training in how to do so. And that's probably because it is such an instinctive sport. It's something that we do, for all of us, we've been doing since we were in nappies. And so we kind of just run the way we do. The irony of that, of course, is that actually for most of us, or for most people, they don't run efficiently. They run exactly the same way as their parents do. And I see this. I work with some juniors, and I kind of sometimes I shake my head at the movement principles that they exhibit, and then I'll meet mum or dad and see them run, and I'm like, I now understand why you move the way that you do. Pelvis obviously tilts forward and back, as well as nutates while you move. Crucial thing from a running perspective, from a chiropractic perspective, is that if that thing doesn't sit in neutral, if not in slight posterior, then someone is going to have some challenges moving. Fundamentally, running is the ability to lift the heel off the ground, drive the knee forward, land the foot back underneath the center of gravity, and then repeat the process. But of course, the way that most people do it is they have a really long stride, right? So if I have a really long stride and I take a muscle beyond its functional capacity, then, and in particular talking about the hamstrings, then it's really difficult to bring the hamstrings into play when we run. So then the byproduct of that, of course, is to get the foot off the ground from its terminal point, from its furthest point back. Someone then has to go into hyperlumbar lordosis, as well as trunk rotation, as well as pulling forward from the hip flexors, as well as pushing off from the calf muscles. Well, I don't know if you've ever examined a human body, but the hip flexors aren't exactly the strongest muscle group in the world, nor are the calf muscles. The hamstring and the glutes as well, the hamstrings and the glutes may not be the strongest muscle groups in society, but they probably should be, right? There's a reason why we have a big posterior, and it's because we have some big muscles there that actually, when working well, are really powerful, right? If you've ever seen a Jamaican sprinter, then have a look at their derriere, and you will notice that there's some significant muscle mass there. Yeah, and fundamentally, if you want to be able to run fast or long distances for that matter, then I suggest that a focus on using the hamstrings and the glutes is paramount. So one of the major cues that I will, or some of the major cues that I will give to people are, first and foremost, to use that hamstring, to be thinking about lifting the foot up off the ground using the hamstring, or lifting the shin off the ground, really. So lifting the shin to parallel rather than pushing the foot off using the calf muscle. That means that then we have to bring some momentum into play, but the hamstrings, once trained, become a much better equipped muscle to run long distances or to run quickly than the calf muscles and the hip flexors. That also, if we can get someone to use their hamstrings to lift the foot up off the ground, means that by virtue of that, they ultimately end up having a shorter stride length. By having a shorter stride length, they're then more likely to be landing underneath center of gravity, and they're going to be taking the foot off the ground sooner. I know Dr. Baptista taught me this. She'd probably deny that she taught me this or anything. That we have somewhere between 0 and 15 degrees of hip extension in the human body, right? So as soon as the femur is going more than 15 degrees behind the center of gravity, we are loading into lumbar lordosis. So as a chiropractor, who's ever met people who run who have sore lumbar spine? Probably everyone, pretty much everyone. So then it's a case of saying, okay, well, really, the simple cue there is if you can, for most people, and it's a bit more complex than that, obviously, but if you can shorten the stride and increase and lift the foot up off the ground using the hamstring, then you're going to be a bit better off. With that, in order to actually maintain speed, someone is going to have a high turnover, a high cadence. That should hopefully make absolute sense. Yeah, the more time someone spends in the air and the less time someone spends on the ground, the less fatigue there's going to be, both at an acute level as well as at a chronic level, at an ongoing level. From there, of course, and this is maybe one of my frustrations with chiropractic, and particularly from a straight chiropractic perspective, that chiropractors are all about checking and adjusting the spine and pelvis and the nervous system and everything else, and that's fantastic. But to be a runner, I maintain that efficiency is the combination of technique and the way that you move, the mobility of your joints, the flexibility of your muscles and soft tissues, and your strength. So it would be naive of us to think that just because we can teach someone to move well, and that we check and adjust their spine and make sure their joints are mobile, and we get them to do some yoga or some stretching or something so that they're nice and flexible. But if they're not strong enough, then they're always going to have challenges, right? And that's not exclusive to the hamstrings. That's the firing patterns of the glutes. That's the firing patterns of the deep abdominal muscles, and therefore with those two, the control of the pelvic tilt. And so really, I think it's hugely important as for chiropractors working with runners that actually there's an education. And I'm not suggesting that chiropractors are the ones that are teaching people to these firing patterns, because of course I would suggest it's a case of stick to what we know and what you're good at. But to ignore that strength component would be naive. Equally, when a runner lands, if we think, we've talked a little bit about the foot landing behind the centre of gravity, the foot taking off behind the centre of gravity. If we think about the foot as it lands, for the vast majority of runners, the foot, when it hits the ground, is landing a long way in front of the centre of gravity. Some of you may know a tiny bit about race walking. There's fundamentally 2 rules of race walking, and race walking really being one step removed from the most inefficient form of running, or maybe it is the most inefficient form of running, in my personal opinion. The 2 rules being that the knee has to be fully extended as the foot hits the ground, and that one foot must always be on the ground. So by virtue of that, the foot is always going to be as dorsiflexed as possible, or as turned upwards as possible at the point of landing, and the knee, of course, is going to be fully extended. So therefore, there's going to be a huge amount of force going through the lower limb and further up, obviously with everything affecting everything else. Every time there's a step taken. So if we were to go out onto the street, while you're listening to this, and have a look at some runners go past, you'd probably see that they're pretty close to that. Right, their foot is dorsiflexed at the point of landing, their knee is pretty much extended, and they land a long way in front of their centre of gravity. Well, I would suggest that that's abusive to the human body. Yeah, here's a great piece of symmetry that sometimes I talk about it when I'm in seminars, and people are like, "What the hell are you talking about?" As chiropractors, obviously, we're pretty aware of the curves of the spine. So you obviously have a cervical lordosis, you have a thoracic kyphosis, and you have a lumbar lordosis. Really, those curves carry on, right? So we go upwards. We could go from the lordosis of the cervical spine. In essence, we have a kyphosis round through the meninges, and it carries on down from the bottom of the spine. So we then have, from the bottom of the sacrum, we then have a kyphosis coming the other way around the derriere. We then have a lordosis coming as someone stands in a relaxed position. We have a lordosis happening through the back of the knees. We have a kyphosis round the calf muscles, around the heel, although there's actually another lordosis kyphosis in there. And then, of course, it continues on through the plantar fascia with the arches, and then wraps around to the toes, right? It's kind of like, I'm trying to think, who's the anatomy trains guy? Do you remember his name?
I don't know, but I know who you're talking about.
Yeah, so it's kind of that, that continuation of things.
Which makes a lot of sense.
Absolutely. So my suggestion is absolutely to people that when they run, it's a case of thinking, okay, well, everything is curved, so it's kind of like a spring. So if we can treat it as a nice soft landing, bring that landing from way out in front of the centre of gravity to somewhere close to being underneath centre of gravity, which means that the knee's going to be bent, the ankle's going to be nice and relaxed, the hip's going to be nice and relaxed, the spine as is, and then it's a case of lifting the foot off the ground at the other end. The head obviously is a big one. Centre of gravity is always going to run through the crown of someone's head and out through their backside. So while running, if you only ever give someone one cue when they're running, tell them to keep their head and eyes up, control the bowling ball on the top of their shoulders, and there's going to be a much better chance that they're able to run with a nice high leg turnover, a nice short stride, and lifting the foot up underneath their centre of gravity.
That's amazing. If that's not chiropractic philosophy, I don't know what is. That was great, and I loved it. And something in there that really, really inspired me, and you said it again, but I want you to talk about it a little bit more, is you're talking about that stride rate, and what you want to spend is as much time in the air as you can, because that's the most efficient way of doing it.
Yeah.
And what you said last time is running's a lot more about flying than it is about putting your foot on the ground.
Absolutely, yeah. So one of the rules of race walking, go back to race walking.
Yeah.
One of the rules of race walking is one foot must always be on the ground. Then the opposite of that, of course, is a period where both feet are up off the ground, which we call double flight phase. Yeah, so really, I joke, but I say it seriously to runners that really the goal is to get you up off the ground, to get you flying. So it's about learning to fly and not to run. We talk always, and I just have, but we talk about stride length, which of course is actually a misnomer, because if we, the race walker, by virtue of the fact that they must have one foot on the ground, is there's going to be a period where both are on the ground, and that is their stride. But of course, if we're running, and there's a period where both feet are off the ground, and then there's only ever one foot on the ground, there's never actually a stride. So if we think about, and this is kind of one of my hypothetical things that I talk about quite a bit, but if you chop the body in half, each half of the body is only ever doing one thing, right? Whether you're running on the spot or whether you're running at breakneck speed, then the foot is, well, the hamstring is activating to lift the foot up off the ground. You fly through the air, you lower the foot back down underneath the centre of gravity, and you repeat the process. Ideally, at a very high rate. And that rate really shouldn't change whether someone's running on the spot at an efficient rate or as fast as they possibly can. Yeah, and so I challenge you, if you don't believe me, to jump online and look at some YouTube clips of say the Olympic marathon, the Olympic 1500 metres, and maybe an Olympic 400 metre race, and you'll probably see that pretty much all of those guys and girls have a pretty similar stride rate. What's that rate? You could jump online, or we could jump online, and we'd probably get a pretty consistent message that that's about 170 to 190 steps in a minute. So that's 85 to 95 per leg. I have moved away from telling people to aim for that, as from a running perspective, mainly because unless they're close to it, they're going to really struggle to get there. So more important than that is having the conversation with people to say, okay, well once your foot is on the ground, let's get it off the ground as quick as possible, or as quick as maintainable, and then over time you're working on making that quicker. And of course, making sure that you're then flying through the air. And that's not that you're leaping into the air with every step. That's in essence that you're floating along, and every so often you're at quite high frequency, but every so often you're just bouncing down underneath yourself to support yourself and then lift off again.
Certainly. Well, my favourite example of that is watching Usain Bolt run in slow motion, because that's exactly what he does.
Absolutely.
Like, his top body is pretty much level the entire time, and you just see these massive long legs just grip the ground and rip underneath them.
Totally.
And there's stride rate, even though he's a tall guy, he's not extending and lifting his legs way in front of him, pulling it behind. It's just touching, ripping underneath.
I spent 4 hours at Rosehill Intermediate on Wednesday this week, working with the Year 8s there and around speed and agility training.
Cool.
Athletics with Athletics New Zealand. Athletics Auckland. And trying to get these young fellas, or boys and girls, to sprint, and they all, not all, the vast majority of them, when we get them up to sprinting, they want to sprint with their head down, their legs way out the back, and take these massive long strides. And actually, and I'm going to say this is kind of embarrassing to say, but I got beaten in a sprint race by a 12-year-old on Wednesday. Yeah, and actually, as much as that's embarrassing, I'm a long distance runner, so I kind of expected it. Yeah. The kid is at the age of 12 is significantly taller than I am, and has significantly more muscle mass than I will ever have. So it's probably not too embarrassing. But the great thing is that from the start of the session to the end of the session, here's a kid who was already a very quick sprinter, right? But just by giving him some simple cues around, bring his head up, leaning back, or feeling like he's leaning back, shortening his stride, flying through the air, he's able to run. I don't even know what we ran for 100 metres, but
I'm pretty sure
it was fast.
Seconds.
Yeah, it was fast. It was Usain Bolt style.
That is awesome. And then you just brought it up, and this is the next thing I want to talk about, is what's the difference for you between short distance, obviously sprinting, compared to long distance, and what makes you more attracted personally to long distance running compared to that shorter style?
It's probably physiology. So those who don't know me, I'm 5'7", and Kent Blackburn called me the other morning spider arms. So I'm not really built for speed. That being said, I have a joke with the athletes that I coach that I'm more than happy to race any one of them over any distance from 100 meters to 100 miles. So I think I've been beaten by an athlete once and pulled up on that, but I still will back myself. Hence why I raced the 12-year-old the other day. But so my physiology and therefore my ability and probably therefore my enjoyment of running long distances is greater than running shorter distances. Physiologically, just to talk about that, or from a movement principle perspective, we've basically touched on it, but they are, for all intents and purposes, exactly the same. Yeah. So whether we're looking at a sprinter or whether we're looking at a marathon runner, the way that they move should be very, very similar. Actually, a side note on that, a couple of months ago was the Olympics, and you can imagine being crazy about sport and running that when the Olympics is on, I'm glued to the television for most of it. And I flicked it on one day. I was flicking through the channels, and there was they had the decathletes running 1,500 meters, and so it's quite interesting, right? Because the decathletes, as much as they are very, very good 1,500 meter runners, compared to a Nick Willis or someone similar, they're rubbish at running 1,500 meters. And so you watched it, and it looked like what it was. Their stride frequency, their cadence, was through the floor. Yeah, and these guys are still running faster than 99% of the people that are going to listen to this podcast will ever be able to. But as I say, compared to the likes of Nick Willis, they wouldn't even make the heats or the semi-final. They wouldn't even qualify for the 1,500 meters. And really, the biggest difference between them was that some of them are bigger guys because obviously they have 10 events that they have to be able to master, and that when they run, their stride frequency was much lower than that of an East African middle distance run.
Yeah. That's awesome. So then, for you as well, so obviously, physiology-wise, it just suits you better to go for long distance runs, which is absolutely fine. But something that I thought was really interesting, and Kent was kind of talking about this, but I think it came from you, was talking about heart rate and trying to manage that. Because obviously over a sprint, it's a short period of time, you just blitz and just go as hard as you can, even though form-wise it's very similar, but you don't have to manage your physiology as much as you do when you are doing a longer distance. So just wanted to talk about that a little bit more, like what are all the other variables that you have to start to manage in that longer term run, because you are managing a lot more stuff, especially with you, because you particularly do trail runs. Mm-hmm. So now you've got stuff that can trip you up on the ground rather than just a nice clean pitch. So what are those kind of things that you have to manage?
Yeah, so really it's the intensity, and obviously you can manage that through various different means. I'll give you a scenario that I talked about earlier this week with a bunch of the athletes that I coach, and the scenario is that Ben and I are going to go and do a 20-kilometer race, and we both have the capacity to run a 5-kilometer personal best of, for argument's sake, 22 and a half minutes. So that would be 4 minutes 30 per K. So in this 20K race, because Ben knows that he can run 5Ks at 4:30 minutes per K, and naively thinks that he'll be able to do that continuously for 20Ks, he starts off the race at 4:30 minutes per K and runs the first 5Ks in 22 and a half minutes. And then after that, it doesn't take an expert to work out that he's probably going to suffer for the next 15Ks, right? So progressively, he's going to get slower. And I would suggest that he might run the next 5Ks in more like 5.5 minutes per K. After that, the next 5 might be 6 minutes per K, and after that, the next 5 might be 6.5, maybe even 7 minutes per K. So he's A, going to suffer, and B, going to start to struggle towards the end in terms of keeping his pace or holding an intensity. I know that I can't maintain, in this scenario, that I can't maintain 4.5 minutes per K for 20Ks. So, but I know that I could go for a run for an hour, maybe 2 hours at more like 2 hours, maybe even 3 hours at more like 5.5 minutes per K. So I start off in this scenario, and I decide that I'm just going to run 5.5 minutes per K. So I run that for the first 15Ks, by which case, and obviously after 5Ks, that means that Ben's going to be 5 minutes ahead of me, so he's got a huge gap on me. He's about a K ahead after 5Ks. I just keep pottering along at the same pace, and then with 5Ks to go, I press the boost button and see what I can maintain. Sure, in that scenario, no one's ever going to be able to run their, well, maybe not ever, but it's unlikely that someone's going to run their personal best over 5K in that scenario. So of course, let's say for argument's sake that in that scenario I can run maybe 4 minutes 45 per K for the final five kilometers. I've had a great time running the 20Ks, and I think when we do the maths, we work out with that scenario that I would beat Ben by somewhere between 5 and 10 minutes by cruising 15Ks and then running as hard as I can for the final 5Ks. So really, as it relates to working with runners, and we see this a lot, and there's a direct, I suggest there's a direct correlation with injuries. When someone in the scenario that I just gave chooses option A and runs as fast as they can for as long as they can, and then suffers like crazy, the chances of them succumbing to injury, and particularly from an overuse perspective rather than an acute perspective, is massive. Versus the person who is running sub-maximally and then maybe runs a little bit quicker towards the end, because they haven't pushed their body to the extreme of what it's capable of. The chances of injury are far less. That's hypothetical, but I'd love to look at that.
But that makes sense, though.
Absolutely. Yeah. And there's a psychological component of that as well. And I think I would suggest that no one ever has a physiological challenge without a psychological component, right? So in that same scenario, if we made you suffer for 15Ks, or if actually you'd suffer for 19Ks, because the first K would feel great, and then you're suffering from there. If we made you suffer for that long, then psychologically that would be a really hard thing to do. I maintain that the any success that I've ever had in running is my ability to put myself into a dark place and suffer better than most. Maybe that makes me masochistic, and given that I make athletes do it, that probably makes me sadistic as well. But,
hey, good combination.
You can't have sadism without masochism, I guess.
Exactly.
Where was I going with that?
Let's talk about when you are running, because at the end of the day, yes, you can, like you said, hypothetically, not be pushing yourself to your personal best, but be running at a comfortable pace where you feel really good at.
Absolutely.
And then that last little bit, you sprint hard and you finish, and you're going to be tired at the end, but you gave it all your gas. But inside of that, if you have someone like me, for example, so I recently went for a 6-kilometre run with Kent. He's been training for the coast to coast, so 5.5 minute Ks for him, easy. For me, that's pushing it. And I after the first couple of Ks, that was fine, I could do it. But after that, I was suffering. Lungs were burning. You could see my technique went out of the window. Lordosis came in. Stride rate went really, really big again, and I was just trying to push myself, and it all became a mental game for me for the next 4K, which was dumb. Whereas you could see him just ran like the Terminator, just fine, feet underneath him. His stride rate didn't even change, and it wasn't even
because it's sub-maximal, right? And so really, I think that unless someone's going to go out and buy a heart rate monitor or go and do a lactate test. Or whatever else, it's difficult to know exactly where those limits are. So really, for I guess for people listening to the podcast as well as clientele that they might be dealing with, I would suggest that if the simple piece of advice is that when people go out for a run, it should be at an intensity where they could still have a conversation with someone. It probably shouldn't be at the point where they could sing a song, but they should be able to say good day, ask someone a question, answer the question. So often when we see runners out there, it's and we see them and they're in that run as fast as they can. There's an article that I was reading a couple of weeks ago which was talking about the militarization of fitness, and it's probably really the militarization of life, where stress and busyness is seen as a status symbol, and so and exercise is no different, where we have, and I have nothing against CrossFit, but we have a kind of a CrossFit and those sorts of group fitness scenarios where it's about push yourself as hard as you possibly can. If you're not vomiting by the end of it, then you haven't pushed yourself hard enough. And I think there's a time and a place for that, and I would apply Pareto's principle, which is the 80-20 rule to that, where 80% of the time things should be sub-maximal and enjoyable, and then 20% of the time also you can push the intensity to the extreme. But as you said, with respect to running, as soon as we start to push into that, to maximal levels, technique goes out the window. It's not that enjoyable, and there's a multitude of things that come as a result.
And something you just talk about the Olympics again. I think I was watching the 1500 and then the 3000 meter races, and you looked at the Kenyans running it, and they all kind of had they must have had a coach who just taught them to do it this way. But you could see all of them. There were 2 or 3 in each of the races I was watching. They all just sat at the back of the group. They were obviously not running at their fastest, but as soon as they got to the last, I think it was the 3 or 2 laps or whatever it was, they just opened up and blitzed everybody because they still had so much gas in the tank.
Yeah. We could probably have a whole podcast conversation about footwear and whether there's a link to that and the way that
Sure.
East African runners run or runners run. But that's a
That's
side
a different conversation. Because everyone was wearing those Nike ones, weren't they? Because they all had like Nike shoes with there was pink on the front and yellow at the back, or was that just a...
I'd suggest that they were wearing whatever their sponsors paid them to wear. Maybe that's a cynical. If you want to know more about shoes, then you can jump on my website. I have some reasonably strong opinions about footwear.
I would actually recommend that. I've definitely read through a bunch of those articles and learned a lot from it. So I think it's fantastic. And you see, my footwear has changed, and the shoes that I adjust in have changed, and it's way more comfortable for me.
Absolutely. And hopefully that means from a long-term perspective, and actually I'll touch on this, right? So the scenario I'll give people is that, well, not even a scenario, it's a fact, there's 168 hours in a week. For argument's sake, if you sleep for 58 hours in a week and you exercise for 10, most people are doing well if they exercise for 10 hours a week. What you wear on your feet or what you do with your feet for the other 100 hours is the important part. So as much as in my utopia, everyone would be running around or exercising in shoes that were flat, flexible, shaped like a foot and close to the ground, that's probably not reality. And actually, if we took everyone in society, particularly from an adult perspective, and put them in shoes that were flat, flexible, shaped like a foot and close to the ground and exercise, we'd probably have calf muscle problems in 80% of them. Mm-hmm. If we apply those same principles in life, I suggest that we don't have the same challenges. If we apply them for long enough, then of course, or over a period of time, then the calf muscles are able to become stronger. The Achilles is able to become more flexible. The hip flexors aren't shortening, and therefore, then applying those same principles when we run is much easier. Going back to the Olympics, 1500 meters, and I think I might have talked about this when I came and talked at the practice. My challenge to you all, listen to the podcast, is to jump on YouTube once you finish listening to the podcast and look up the 1500 meter race or 1500 meter Olympic final closest to your year of birth. Obviously, if you're a male, then look at the guys one, and if you're a female, then look at the ladies one. And so you're more than welcome to prove me wrong on this, because I haven't watched every single Olympic final. And actually, it could be any 1500 meter race. I want you to watch it through the lens of he or she who can control their physiology in terms of the movement of their shoulders, their head being nice and upright, their stride frequency, that their heels are still lifting up off the ground so their shins reaching parallel. He or she who can control that for the longest, chicken or egg, will be there at the end, in the mix at the end. The person who their shoulders start to be uncontrollable, their stride length starts to lengthen, their stride frequency goes down, their heels aren't lifting off the ground, their head goes forward, I suggest that's the person who's going to be the next one to get pinged off the back of the group in those races. 1500 meter races, I choose them because they are probably the most difficult event for people for top level athletes to run well, just because it's a combination of speed, efficiency, endurance and strength all at the same time.
Definitely. Well, and when I used to do athletics at high school, that was my race of choice, the 1500 metres. And then I had puberty and got much bigger and ganglier, and I couldn't control anything, and I had no control of my physiology, and I lost out. And I just kind of want to relate this back to chiropractic a little bit, because I think that's where chiropractic really fits into that athletic point of view. It's, yes, you have all the skill, the technique, but when you put your body under load, under pressure, if there is some kind of subluxation or miscommunication there happening between the brain and the body, of course you're going to lose that amount of control much sooner. Absolutely. And do you see some of that in your athletes as well? Hence they get sent to Anna pretty quick.
Yeah, absolutely. Or to chiropractors around the world. Yeah. Absolutely. I think I guess the way that I look at it from a healthcare perspective is that we have an athlete in the centre, and then around them there's in essence concentric rings of providers, and there might be certainly there'll be a chiropractor in one of those concentric rings somewhere. I would like to think that it's in the first ring, along with a coach, preferably me, and
and should be.
Yeah, and should be, particularly if they want to do well.
Yeah.
And some other providers. And in particular, go back to what we were talking about earlier. If efficiency is the combination of technique, strength, flexibility, mobility, then probably the 4 components of a healthcare team that I would put in that first concentric ring is a coach, in particular someone who's going to help someone with technique as well as their training, someone who's going to deal with the mobility of their joints, and that would for me would be a chiropractor, someone who's going to help them deal with the flexibility of their soft tissues, and that might be that they go and do some yoga stuff, or they do stuff self-directed, or they have a massage, or all of that. And the 4th component there would be the strength. So really I would recommend for most of my clients that they're either doing again their self-directed strength work, or they're working with a Pilates instructor or similar. Outside of that, obviously there's going to be there might be a naturopath, there might be GP, whatever it might be, other providers. Probably those are the core ones, that we're looking at, that technique, strength, flexibility, and mobility. So,
because what you're looking at is how can you maximize performance,
absolutely.
And that's what you need. You need those kind of proper support networks in place to make it happen.
Yeah, and it falls down, when people aren't doing their due diligence in terms of those things.
Certainly. And then talking about the militarization of working out. So, and a really good example that you used was the All Blacks and how controlled their workouts are in between different sessions. So, do you reckon you can talk?
I have to be a little bit careful about this. So, I'm sure some of the people listening to the podcast were probably at the seminar, but I think it was 2, maybe 3 years ago, at one of the FIX, as in the Federation of Sports Chiropractic seminars down in Queenstown. Dr. Deb Robinson spoke. Dr. Deb Robinson had just finished as the All Blacks doctor, and so she kind of took us through the kind of the routine of what the training schedule will look like week to week with the All Blacks when they're in competition. So when they're going from playing a game on Saturday and then playing another game on Saturday, like they just have, and the biggest fear with the All Blacks in camp is that they come out of camp at the other end less fit than they were going in, just because there's so much there's obviously a massive need for recovery as well as trying to train at the same time. And that's possibly the component that athletes in various domains miss out on most, is the recovery, right? So it's all very well to think, okay, well, I've got to go for a run, or I've got to go to the gym, or do whatever the training session is that someone might be doing. But if you're not getting the rest in between, then when is the physiology being given a chance to change and grow and evolve?
Absolutely. And I wanted to talk about that because it definitely seems like that's a change, and obviously you're part of this with your training programs and your uniqueness inside of that, is there's a change in athletics psychology. Instead of what it used to be, which is just push, go, that's how you get better, it's now become a lot more understanding and honouring how the human body actually works.
Yeah.
And like that 80-20 rule you were talking about before, and you look at the All Blacks, who are the best in the world, performing at their best, and the access to information that they have tell them that we only train hard for 3 days in a week of 7.
Yeah.
And that kind of makes sense to me. It's like, well, yeah, you're going to be running those skills, you're going to be talking about it in terms of how do we play the game well, but in terms of pushing my body to get the most out of it, I'm not overtraining.
Yeah.
And I'm making sure that I'm allowing my body to recover. And just to jump back to running, because like you said, you do it since you're in nappies, this is probably the most basic form of exercise, the most basic form of movement that we do.
Absolutely.
And you learn how to do it from your parents or from the physiology that you have at a really young age. And if you're, say, subluxated, for example, bring it back to chiropractic because that's what I do, or if you're not aware of it because you don't have a coach or someone to talk to you about that, you're going to carry that poor physiology, that poor habit into adult life.
Yeah. And
then you go for a run and you go, oh, well, it sucks, I can't do it.
Yeah.
I'm just not a runner.
Yeah.
And that's not true. You're a human.
No.
We're designed to run that way. We're on 2 legs. It just means that your way of doing it is really inefficient.
Absolutely.
And that's definitely what I found when I started to get back into it a bit more recently, because my running style is really inefficient. And I would find that my shoulders are moving because I'm trying to create extra extension in my lower back, like that hyperlordosis you were saying before. And I was coming up with all these other compensations. So yeah, like once I finished a 3K run, my body was sore. Screw going for a 20,
Yeah.
you know? But then as soon as, like you said, those basic tips, lift your chin up, look at where you're going, Bring your body so your weight's actually in the centre of gravity. Bring your stride rate out. Think about flying instead of pounding the ground to get speed, and
Absolutely.
Instantly it's so much easier.
Yeah, totally. The hypothesis that just came into my head, or reappeared in my head, which I think I might have shared with you, is that, well, the first bit's not really a hypothesis, it's fact. When someone feels threatened, physiologically, how does their physiology change? They go into a defense posture. They go into fetal position. So of course, fetal position is all about protecting the vital organs through the midline, right? So it's about protecting the face, about protecting the heart and lungs, and about protecting the genitals, basically. So it's head forward, shoulders forward, arms across body, bend forward at the hips, anterior pelvic tilt likely, and that's kind of how people live their lives. Obviously, the sad part about that is that, or the tragic part about that is that there's people who live through fear day to day, and therefore that's their physiology exhibited all the time, right? And that's a completely appropriate defense posture for them, given whatever's going on in their life. I maintain that the emotion of fear and the emotion of fatigue are very similar. And so the hypothesis is that as a runner becomes fatigued, their physiology tends to move towards fetal position. So that being, as they run along, their head comes forward, their shoulders come forward or rounded, their hands come in across their body, they bend forward at the hips, go into anterior pelvic tilt, and protecting things through the through the midline. And so, again, one of those cues that is really simple to give to people out there running is, think about doing the opposite of that. Think about running proud. Think about running in anatomical position. So it's head up, it's shoulders back, it's arms turned out, it's pelvis in a neutral, if not slightly posterior tilt. It's nice and proud through the trunk, and stand up tall. Be proud of what you're doing.
Yeah.
Obviously, 20 kilometers into a half marathon, that's going to be challenging for someone to do, depending on
Sure.
how well they've controlled that intensity that we're talking about earlier.
Certainly. And then I just noticed on Facebook the other day you've got some exciting things coming up. So I'd love to talk about James Kuegler coaching a little bit more, and then get some details on you. If people are really inspired, they want to get in touch, either send their patients or come and see you themselves. What's coming up for you? Talk about your exciting things, and then how do we get in touch?
Awesome. The easiest way for people to kind of follow what's going on, well, there's two really easy ways. One is Facebook. The Facebook page is James Kuegler Coaching. I'm sure you can find that spelled, as long as you can learn how to spell my surname.
Yeah, I'll put it in the show notes. It's hard to spell.
Awesome.
Just look at that. You can click on it straight away.
Yeah, cool. And the second one is that we are sending out, the Royal We, are sending out some basic training tips on Wednesdays and Sundays, so twice a week for people. I have some guys in particular. I have Timothy Leeming, who some of you will know, who's currently going through chiropractic college and is an exercise nutritionist. He's writing some articles for me. I'm writing some articles, and I have some other guys writing some articles. So there's a bunch of articles going out, so I'd love you to jump on there and subscribe. We have, which is pretty cool from a chiropractic perspective, Tim has just written in fact, go back a step. There's an article that's been doing the rounds for a while, which is on Runners World, which is why runners should get adjusted. And it's a great article, or the message behind it is great, but it's badly written in my opinion. So I said to Tim a couple of weeks ago, I said, hey, can we put together an article about why athletes should get adjusted? And so I've got the draft back from Tim for that, and that'll be coming out in the coming weeks. So that will be a really exciting one, hopefully hopefully you the chiros and students enjoy that, and no doubt if you like that, you can share it on your own means. We have a bunch of events around the country. I'm a bit of a travelling gypsy, so I'm doing over the last couple of weeks, I've done some running workshops and seminars in Palmerston North, Wellington, Hamilton, Auckland, and coming up I'm heading to Tauranga, Invercargill, a whole lot of other places. There is lots of scope to come and speak at people's practice if they'd like to, or to get clients along to workshops that are happening around the country. If you're interested in having me come to your town and it's not already happening, then send me an email and we'll have a chat and we'll go from there. Obviously, for a bunch of the people who will listen to this, we probably know each other on a first name basis anyway, so touch base from there. That's probably the exciting stuff that's going on. And then from an ongoing coaching perspective, We have a training squad, which really is a 12-month get involved, let's throw the kitchen sink at someone and see if we can turn them into the best athlete they can possibly be. It's the education around all of the stuff that we've been talking about today, as well as whatever is relevant and pertinent to that individual individual's development. Sorry, getting tongue tied.
Yeah. Very exciting.
Yeah.
Very exciting.
Absolutely.
James, thank you so much for coming on today. It's been an absolute blast. I learned a bunch again, which is really, really awesome.
Cool. Thank you for having me along. I hope this is useful for other people, and I look forward to continuing the conversation as we move forward.
Thank you for all the support you've been showing this platform. If you have any ideas for future episodes or you'd like to be involved, send me a message through the website or your preferred social media. For the resources mentioned in this episode, check out the show notes or thechirosation.com. If you enjoyed this episode, share it with a friend and leave a comment on Facebook. Now go out there and start a Chirosation today.